Does your father own a chain of convenience stores? The word sliced through the air of Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 sharper than the crisp tear of paper that would follow. Terminal 4 was a symphony of chaos, a vast cathedral of human movement bathed in artificial light that bounced off polished floors. The air hung heavy with a peculiar cocktail of scents, burnt coffee from overpriced cafes, the chemical sweetness of duty-free perfumes, and the unmistakable metallic tang of anxiety. Every surface reflected the fluorescent glow, creating an otherworldly ambiance where time seemed both suspended and rushing forward. Sounds ricocheted off high ceilings, the mechanical drone of announcements, the rumble of wheeled luggage across terrazzo floors, the polyglot murmur of 1,000 conversations in dozens of languages. It was the white noise of modern travel, the soundtrack of people moving between worlds. For 17-year-old Jasmine Wilson, this cacophony was the drumbeat to her future. Each noise, from the distant chime of boarding calls to the hiss of automatic doors, marked another step toward Vienna, toward the hallowed halls of the Conservatory of Music, toward the moment that would define her life's trajectory. Standing in the priority boarding line, Jasmine felt the weight of Apollo, her 18th-century cello, against her back. She'd named him after the god of music when she was 8, imagining that some divine essence lived within the aged wood. The case was worn at the edges from a decade of rehearsals, competitions, and performances, a physical testament to her dedication. Jasmine looked nothing like what most people expected of a world-class musician headed to audition at one of the most prestigious music academies in the world. Her simple gray hoodie from her high school orchestra bore small coffee stains from late-night practice sessions. Her black leggings were chosen for comfort during the long flight, not style. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat puff, and her face, free of makeup, shone with the nervous excitement of a teenager on the precipice of her dreams. She adjusted the strap of Apollo's case and moved forward as the priority line for SkyBridge Airlines Flight 847 to Vienna inched closer to the podium. Her fingers, calloused from years of pressing against steel strings, tightened around her passport and boarding pass. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. If this story about standing tall against discrimination resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. This is more than just another airport incident. It's a turning point that will reshape an entire industry. For 10 years, Jasmine had sacrificed everything for this moment. While her classmates went to football games and summer pool parties, she practiced. While they slept in on weekends, she was perfecting her vibrato technique. While they posted selfies from the mall, she was memorizing Bach's 6 suites for unaccompanied cello. Her dedication wasn't just about talent, it was about discipline, determination, and dreams bigger than herself. The Vienna Conservatory of Music was more than a school. It was a temple for musicians, a place where legends were born. Getting an audition there was nearly impossible. Earning a spot would be transformative. The acceptance letter had arrived 3 months ago, and Jasmine had screamed so loudly that her father had rushed into her room thinking she was injured. Instead, he found her jumping on her bed, letter clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Now, as Jasmine took another step forward in line, she felt her heart beat in time with the announcement system's steady pulse. In her pocket, her phone vibrated with a text from her father. "Proud of you, sunshine. Call when you land." She smiled, typing back a quick, "Love you. We'll call." Dominic Wilson was a man who had built an empire from nothing, but to Jasmine, he was just Dad. The man who sat through every recital, who brought her soup when she was sick, who taught her that her brown skin didn't determine her future. Her talent and tenacity did. As the line moved forward, Jasmine found herself at the podium face to face with 2 gate agents. One was a young Hispanic man with kind eyes and a name tag reading Miguel Sanchez. The other was a middle-aged Caucasian woman whose blonde hair was sprayed into a rigid helmet, her name tag identifying her as Heather Montgomery. Her small eyes darted over Jasmine with a look that the teenager had encountered before assessment assumption dismissal. "Boarding pass and passport," Heather said, not as a request, but a command. Jasmine smiled anyway, sliding her documents across the counter. "Good afternoon." Heather Montgomery didn't return Jasmine's smile. Her French manicured nails clicked against the counter as she took the passport and boarding pass, examining them with the scrutiny of someone looking for a reason to say no. Her eyes flicked between the documents, and Jasmine a frown deepening the lines around her mouth. "Vienna." Heather's voice was flat, the destination pronounced as if it were an unlikely story rather than a city. "Yes." Jasmine nodded, her enthusiasm undiminished. "I'm auditioning at the Conservatory of Music." Heather made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff, somewhere in the territory of disbelief. She tapped aggressively at her computer keyboard, the unnecessary force revealing something personal in what should have been a routine procedure. Behind the podium, through the large windows, Jasmine could see the gleaming white fuselage of the SkyBridge Airbus A380. It was the flagship of her father's fleet, though that wasn't something she'd ever announce. The SkyBridge logo, a stylized bridge reaching toward a rising sun, caught the afternoon light. Dominic Wilson had designed it himself back when his company was just a dream and a leased cargo plane. Dominic Wilson was the definition of self-made. Born in Baltimore to a single mother who worked 3 jobs, he'd earned a scholarship to study engineering, then aviation management. He'd started with one leased cargo plane, taking routes other airlines considered unprofitable. 20 years later, SkyBridge Airlines was a global carrier with a reputation for luxury innovation and the highest safety standards in the industry. Forbes had recently valued the company at $12.8 billion, and Dominic's personal worth at $4.5 billion. But the Wilson family didn't flaunt their wealth. Dominic had raised Jasmine with a deep understanding of privilege and responsibility. "Money doesn't make you better than anyone," he'd told her repeatedly. "It just gives you more opportunities to do good or evil. The choice is always yours." When Jasmine had been accepted for the Vienna audition, Dominic had immediately offered to send her on the family's private Gulfstream G650. "No stress, no connections, no security lines," he'd said over breakfast. "Chef Martin can prepare your favorite salmon. You can practice on the plane. Arrive fresh." But Jasmine had shaken her head. "Dad, I need to do this myself. I want to walk in there like every other applicant, not like some princess dropped off in a golden carriage. I need to earn this, all of it." Her father's eyes had softened with pride. He recognized in her the same fire that had driven him, the need to succeed on merit, not privilege. Still, he'd insisted on a first-class ticket. "At least let me make the journey comfortable," he'd said. "You need to rest before the audition." She'd laughed and agreed to the compromise. Now, standing at the gate, Jasmine's independent spirit was being tested by Heather Montgomery's increasingly suspicious examination. "There seems to be a problem with your ticket," Heather said, her voice carrying a distinct edge of accusation. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "A problem? What kind of problem? My father's assistant booked it." Heather hummed the sound, dripping with condescension. "This is a full-fare first-class ticket. F class. Very expensive." She looked Jasmine up and down again, her gaze lingering pointedly on the worn hoodie and sneakers. The implication was clear. "You don't belong here." "Yes, I know," Jasmine replied, politeness strained. "Is there an issue with the seat?" Around them, other passengers in the priority line were beginning to stare. Jasmine felt the familiar prickle of being watched, evaluated, found wanting based on assumptions tied to her skin color and casual clothes. "The issue," Heather said, leaning forward and lowering her voice into a conspiratorial yet somehow louder stage whisper, "is that these tickets are often purchased with stolen credit cards, especially for international flights. We have to be extra careful." The words hit Jasmine like a slap. A cold knot of anger and humiliation began to form in her stomach. This wasn't her first encounter with prejudice, but it never got easier. She thought of her father's lessons about handling such moments with dignity, about not giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. "I can assure you the card wasn't stolen," Jasmine said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts. "It was booked through my father's corporate account." "Everyone has a story, honey," Heather scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "And what's your father's corporate account? Does he own a chain of convenience stores?" The casual, ugly racism of the comment. The assumption that black success could only reach a certain limited level took Jasmine's breath away. She felt heat rising to her face but refused to give in to tears. She would not give this woman the satisfaction. "He owns a business," Jasmine said, her voice now dangerously quiet. "Right. A business?" Heather mocked the words coated in sarcasm. She picked up Jasmine's passport again, flipping through the pages with theatrical slowness. "You know, this passport looks a little off," she continued, running her fingernail over the holographic emblem. "It's a brand new passport. I had it expedited 2 months ago." Jasmine said the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She knew her passport was perfect. This was no longer about procedure. It was a power trip, a cruel game being played at her expense. "The lamination feels funny," Heather insisted, scraping her nail over the surface. "Sometimes the fakes are very good. They can get the hologram right, but they never get the feel of the lamination just right." Behind Jasmine, a man in his mid-40s shifted uncomfortably. Thomas Reynolds had built a successful tech company from his garage, eventually selling it for 9 figures to a Silicon Valley giant. As a black entrepreneur, he knew all too well the skepticism and barriers that came with success in spaces traditionally dominated by white faces. The scene unfolding before him was painfully familiar. Just last month, he'd been asked to move from his first-class seat on another airline because a flight attendant couldn't believe he belonged there. No one had recorded that incident. No one had spoken up. He had filed a complaint that disappeared into the corporate void. He'd promised himself never to let that happen to someone else. He discreetly angled his phone downwards, the lens peeking out from under his jacket sleeve, and pressed record. "Ma'am, I have a flight to catch," Jasmine pleaded, her voice cracking slightly. The dream was slipping away, being replaced by a nightmare of fluorescent lights and public humiliation. "It's the most important day of my life. Please." The plea for mercy seemed to fuel Heather's fire. It was the confirmation she sought, the desperation of someone who had been caught. "Oh, I'm sure it is," she said with a saccharine, false sympathy. She held up the boarding pass between her thumb and forefinger like a scientist holding a contaminated specimen. "You know SkyBridge Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for fraudulent travel. We take the security of our passengers and our company very, very seriously." And then with a slow, deliberate motion, she brought her hands together. The sound was shockingly loud in the sudden hush that had fallen over the gate area. Heather Montgomery tore Jasmine Wilson's first-class boarding pass clean in half. She then tore the 2 halves into quarters, the pieces of paper fluttering from her fingers onto the counter like toxic confetti. "It seems," Heather announced to the silent watching crowd, her voice ringing with triumph, "that you won't be flying to Vienna today or any day. Not on SkyBridge. Your passport will be confiscated pending a review by Homeland Security, and your profile has been flagged. Now please, step out of the line. You are holding up our legitimate passengers." For a full 10 seconds, Jasmine could not move. She stared at the mangled pieces of her future lying on the cold gray counter. The world narrowed to that small pile of garbage. The sounds of the airport faded into a dull roar. The faces of the other passengers blurred into a watercolor wash of shock and discomfort. All she could see was Heather's smug, victorious face. And in that moment, the humiliation curdled into a cold, hard resolve. The tears that had threatened to fall evaporated, replaced by an icy fury. This woman had not just insulted her. She had assaulted her future. Slowly, deliberately, Jasmine reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She didn't look for a number. She had it on speed dial. She pressed the number 1. Heather watched, arms crossed. Who are you calling your convenience store owning daddy? Go ahead. Tell him his little girl got caught trying to play with the grown-ups." The phone rang once, twice. A deep, calm voice answered. "Jasmine Sunshine, are you on the plane? I was just tracking your flight." Jasmine took a shaky breath, her voice miraculously steady. "No, Dad. I'm not on the plane." She looked directly into Heather Montgomery's mocking eyes. "There's been a problem at the gate. A big problem." "A problem?" Dominic Wilson's voice shifted instantly. The warm paternal tone was replaced by something sharper, more focused. He was in the middle of a quarterly earnings call in his penthouse office overlooking downtown Manhattan, a room of glass and steel that reflected his own polished, unyielding demeanor. On the massive screen before him, charts and graphs glowed representing the billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of lives his company touched every day. He had just finished projecting a record-breaking quarter. He muted the conference call with a flick of his thumb. "What kind of problem, honey? Did you misplace your passport?" "No, Dad," Jasmine said, her voice gaining strength from the sound of his. "The gate agent. She said she thought my ticket was fraudulent. She said my passport was fake, and then she tore up my boarding pass, right in front of everyone." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was not a silence of confusion, but of immense compressing gravity. It was the silence before a lightning strike. In that quiet, Dominic Wilson, the self-made titan of the aviation industry, processed the data points his daughter, his brilliant, beloved child. A false accusation of fraud, a destroyed ticket, a dream in jeopardy. The variables clicked into place, forming an equation of pure, unadulterated rage. "What is her name?" Dominic's voice was dangerously low, a growl rumbling beneath the surface of the words. Jasmine glanced at the plastic name tag. "Heather. Her name is Heather Montgomery." "Which gate?" "Terminal 4, Gate B24. "Stay right there, Jasmine. Do not move. Do not let them move you. Is she still in front of you?" "Yes." "Put me on speaker." Jasmine's hand trembled slightly as she tapped the icon. She held the phone out. Dominic Wilson's voice, amplified by the small speaker, filled the space around the podium. It was a voice accustomed to commanding boardrooms and negotiating with world leaders. It was calm, but it carried the weight of an iron anvil. "This is Dominic Wilson. To whom am I speaking?" Heather's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by irritation. "This is Heather Montgomery, the gate supervisor. And you are... I am the father of the young lady whose ticket you just destroyed." "Well, Mr. Wilson," Heather said, recovering her swagger. "As I explained to your daughter, we have reason to believe she was traveling on a fraudulent ticket and with a forged document. It's a federal offense, you know. I was just doing my job." "Your job," Dominic repeated the words tonelessly. "Your job is to facilitate the travel of our customers, Ms. Montgomery, not to play detective based on your own prejudices. You have accused my daughter of a felony without a shred of evidence. You have damaged company property by destroying a valid, fully paid ticket, and you have jeopardized her chance at a scholarship that she has worked for her entire life." Heather's face began to pale. The sheer authority in the man's voice was unsettling. It wasn't the angry shouting of a disgruntled customer. It was the cold, precise dissection of a prosecutor. "Now, I don't know who this Mr. Wilson thinks he is." She began trying to regain control. "Oh, I think you will," Dominic said. "What is the name of your station manager at JFK?" Heather froze. This was not the expected script. The father was supposed to yell, threaten a lawsuit, and then she would call security. He wasn't supposed to know about the internal chain of command. I don't have to give you that information," she stammered. "His name is Richard Taylor." Dominic supplied his voice like chisels chipping ice. "I know his name because I appointed him, just as I appointed his boss and his boss's boss." Put Mr. Taylor on the phone now." Panic began to bloom in Heather's chest. The other gate agent, Miguel, was staring at her with what looked like horrified realization. The line of passengers was now a silent, captivated audience to a drama far more interesting than any in-flight movie. From behind Jasmine, Thomas Reynolds spoke up, his voice clear and steady. "I have the entire incident on video. From the moment the agent started questioning the validity of her ticket to the moment she ripped it up. Her exact words were, 'Does he own a chain of convenience stores?' I'd be happy to share it with you, sir." If a bomb had gone off, the effect could not have been more dramatic. Heather's face went from pale to sheet white. Her eyes darted wildly from Jasmine to Thomas's phone and back again. The mention of her own words, repeated verbatim, was a stake through the heart of any deniability. Through the phone, Dominic's voice was now glacial. "Thank you, sir. I may need that. Ms. Montgomery, you have 60 seconds to get Richard Taylor to this gate. If he is not there, the consequences for both of you will escalate beyond your comprehension. The clock is ticking." Heather stumbled away from the podium, fumbling for her radio, her hands shaking so badly she could barely press the button. Richard, you need to get to B-24 right now. It's an emergency." Jasmine stood still, phone in hand, watching the woman who had tried to shatter her world completely unravel. The fear and humiliation were still there, but now they were mixed with a dawning, terrifying understanding of the power her father wielded, a power she had never truly witnessed up close. Miguel, the other gate agent, moved closer to Jasmine. "Miss, I am so sorry," he whispered. "I should have said something. I knew something wasn't right about how she was treating you." Jasmine nodded slightly, acknowledging his apology, but unable to absolve him completely. Sometimes silence in the face of wrong was its own form of complicity. A few minutes later, a portly man in a slightly too tight suit came scurrying down the jet bridge, his face flushed and beaded with sweat. This was Richard Taylor, the JFK station manager for SkyBridge. He exuded an air of harried importance, a man perpetually putting out fires. "What is all this?" he demanded, trying to sound authoritative. "Heather, what's going on? We're holding up a flight." Heather pointed a trembling finger at Jasmine. "Her and her father on the phone. They're making threats." Richard looked at Jasmine with annoyance. "Miss, if there's an issue with your ticket, you need to step aside and go to the customer service desk. We can't delay an international flight for one person." He was defaulting to the standard procedure. Back up his employee, clear the gate, solve the problem later. "Mr. Taylor," came the voice from the phone. Richard started looking around for the source. Jasmine held up the phone. "This is Dominic Wilson," the voice said. Richard's brow furrowed. The name was familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. "An important corporate client, maybe. Mr. Wilson, I am the station manager. I can assure you my agent was following protocol. If your daughter would like to submit a complaint—" "Richard," the voice interrupted, and this time there was no mistaking the Arctic chill. "Think very carefully about your next words. Your agent Heather Montgomery has on camera racially profiled a minor. She has accused her of traveling with fraudulent documents without cause. She has illegally confiscated a valid U.S. passport and destroyed company property in the form of a paid-in-full F-class ticket. You in turn have arrived and immediately taken your prejudiced employee's side without a single fact-finding question. Is that the protocol you were referring to?" "The one I approved." Richard Taylor went rigid. His brain, which had been sluggishly processing the name Dominic Wilson, suddenly made the connection. It wasn't a client. It wasn't a VIP. Dominic Wilson. The Dominic Wilson. The founder, the chairman, the CEO, the man whose signature was on the multi-million-dollar budget for his entire station, the man who owned the very air he was breathing. His blood ran cold. The sweat on his brow was no longer from hurrying. It was from sheer, abject terror. His eyes swiveled from the phone to Jasmine's face, truly seeing her for the first time not as a problem passenger, but as the daughter of the most powerful man in his universe. Mr. Wilson, sir," he stammered, his voice a squeak. I had no idea. I am so sorry. There has been a truly terrible misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding, Richard." Dominic's voice boomed from the phone, making several passengers flinch. "There has been a gross and unforgivable display of bigotry and incompetence. Ground the flight." Richard's jaw dropped. "Sir, ground the flight 847. It's fully boarded." "We can't," did I stutter. "Richard, you will not close that gate door. You will not push back from the gate. You will inform the captain that there is a security issue on the ground, and that they are on an indefinite hold. Do it now, because I am on my way. I am 10 minutes out in the helicopter, and when I arrive I expect you, Miss Montgomery, and the young man who recorded this incident to be waiting for me right there. Everyone else is to be cleared from the area. Am I understood?" The threat wasn't just to his job anymore. This was a cataclysm. Grounding a fully boarded international flight cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in fuel, crew time, landing slot fees, and passenger compensation. It was a logistical and financial nightmare, and Dominic Wilson was triggering it with a phone call as casually as ordering a pizza. Richard, his face the color of ash, turned to a subordinate. "Hold the flight. Tell the captain ground stop security directive from corporate. Clear the gate area. Now, move." The terminal, which had been buzzing with drama, erupted into ordered chaos. Gate agents hurried to redirect passengers. Announcements about a security situation filled the air. Security personnel appeared as if from nowhere to establish a perimeter. Heather Montgomery looked as if she might collapse. She sank onto a stool, her face vacant with shock. The reality of what she had done, the monumental, career-ending, life-altering stupidity of it, was crashing down on her like a tidal wave. She had picked a fight with a god in her own small universe. And now the heavens were about to open. Jasmine disconnected the call and stood amidst the swirling activity, a pillar of calm in the storm she had unwittingly unleashed. She looked at the torn pieces of her ticket still sitting on the counter. It was just paper. Her dream wasn't on that paper. Her dream was in her heart, in her hands, and in the sound of a helicopter that was at that very moment thundering its way across the East River carrying her father. The storm was just beginning. The 10 minutes that followed felt like an eternity stretched on a rack. Under Richard Taylor's panicked direction, the other passengers for Flight 847 were herded away from the gate and directed toward a cordoned-off seating area. Their grumbling about the delay was quickly silenced by the grave expressions of the airline staff and the whispers that a major security situation was unfolding involving corporate command. Heather Montgomery remained on her stool, a statue carved from fear. Her mind was a frantic kaleidoscope of her actions, her words, her sneering confidence. "Does he own a chain of convenience stores?" The phrase echoed in her skull, each syllable a hammer blow against her future. She had spent 15 years with the airline, clawing her way up from check-in agent to gate supervisor. She prided herself on being tough, on not taking any nonsense. She saw entitled kids in expensive clothes all the time trying to game the system. She had simply miscalculated. But there was more to Heather's story, a bitter undercurrent that had poisoned her judgment over the years. 10 years ago, she'd been passed over for promotion in favor of a younger black woman with less experience but an MBA. The official reason was that the airline needed fresh perspectives. Heather had interpreted it differently as the beginning of what she saw as preferential treatment that threatened her position in a world that was changing too fast. Each minor slight since then, real or imagined, had calcified into a shell of resentment that she carried with her daily. When she looked at Jasmine, she didn't see a talented young musician. She saw another threat to her precarious sense of control in a world that seemed determined to push her aside. She hadn't seen a quiet, determined musician. She'd seen a target for her accumulated bitterness for the promotion she was passed over for last year, for the mortgage that was always a day away from late. She had made a terrible, terrible mistake in judgment. but she still couldn't wrap her head around the scale of it. The owner's daughter. It felt like a sick joke. Richard Taylor paced back and forth like a caged animal, constantly wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers. He barked orders into his radio, his voice cracking with strain. "Secure the jet bridge. No one on or off the aircraft. Get me the manifest for the private landing pad at Hangar 17. Yes, that hangar. 17. Now." He alternated between shooting venomous glares at Heather and offering Jasmine sycophantic, terrified smiles. "Miss Wilson, can I get you some water? A coffee? Perhaps you'd like to wait in our first-class lounge. It's very comfortable. We can have it cleared for you." "I'm fine right here," Jasmine said, her voice quiet but firm. She wanted to see this through. She remained standing by the podium, a silent sentinel guarding the scene of the crime. Beside her, Thomas Reynolds stood his ground, his phone held loosely in his hand. He had already texted the video file to his personal cloud storage, a backup just in case. He had also sent a short encrypted message to his lawyer. He knew how these things could go, how corporations could try to silence witnesses. "Thank you," Jasmine said quietly to him. "For recording. For speaking up." Thomas nodded. "I've been in rooms where no one spoke up for me. I promised myself I wouldn't be that person, the one who stays silent." "What happened to you?" Jasmine asked, genuinely curious about the story behind his words. Thomas gave a small, humorless smile. "Last month. First-class seat on Transcontinental. Flight attendant didn't believe I belonged there, asked for my boarding pass 3 times, then suggested I might be more comfortable in economy. Nobody recorded it. Nobody said anything. I filed a complaint that probably went straight to the digital trash can." "I'm sorry," Jasmine said, meaning it. "Don't be. It wasn't your doing, and it's why I'm here now." He glanced at his phone. "Sometimes the only way to change things is to make them visible. Once people can see what's happening, they can't pretend it isn't. My dad says the same thing. Silence is comfortable until it suffocates you. Smart man, your father. You have no idea." The first sign of Dominic Wilson's arrival was not a person but a change in the atmosphere. 2 men in impeccably tailored black suits with earpieces discreetly coiled behind their ears appeared at the end of the concourse. They didn't walk, they flowed through the terminal, their presence parting the crowds of travelers like a ship's bow through water. They were followed by a woman whose sharp, intelligent face was set in a mask of formidable composure. This was Elena Rodriguez, Chief Operating Officer of SkyBridge Airlines, Dominic Wilson's most trusted executive, a woman known throughout the industry as the Silk Dagger, elegant, precise, and lethal. Elena's eyes, the color of storm clouds, swept over the scene, the grounded plane visible through the window, the frantic station manager, the catatonic gate agent, and the tall, poised young woman standing next to a calm-looking businessman. Her gaze softened for a fraction of a second as it rested on Jasmine. She had known Jasmine since she was a baby. Finally, Dominic Wilson appeared. He was not what people might have expected. He wasn't wearing a billionaire's uniform of flashy logos or ostentatious jewelry. He was dressed in a simple dark gray cashmere sweater, tailored trousers, and leather shoes that whispered of quiet expense. He was tall and carried himself with the easy posture of a man who was accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room without ever having to raise his voice. His face was a study in controlled fury. His eyes, the same intelligent, determined eyes as his daughter's, were locked on her. He walked straight to Jasmine, ignoring everyone else. He didn't speak. He simply wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a tight, fierce hug. He held her for a long moment, his hand stroking the back of her head. Jasmine sagged against him, the rigid control she had maintained finally giving way. The warmth of his embrace was the only thing that felt real in this bizarre, surreal bubble. "Are you okay?" He whispered, his voice for her alone. "I am now," she whispered back, pulling away slightly, her composure returning. Only then did Dominic Wilson turn his attention to the others. He He looked at Richard Taylor, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. He looked at Heather Montgomery, whose face had crumpled into a mask of pure dread. His eyes were not hot with anger. They were cold, like the vast empty space between galaxies. It was a terrifying, absolute cold. "Mr. Taylor," Dominic began, his voice level. "Report." Richard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sir, Flight 847 bound for Vienna. Fully boarded with 288 passengers, 16 crew. The flight is grounded on your direct order. The gate area has been cleared. All parties are present as requested." Dominic nodded slowly. "And the catalyst for this multi-million-dollar operational disaster?" His gaze shifted to Heather, pinning her to the stool. Ms. Heather Montgomery. Heather flinched as if he had struck her. She tried to speak, but only a dry, croaking sound emerged. "I want to hear it from you, Miss Montgomery." Dominic continued, taking a step closer. "I want you to explain to me to my face why you felt it was your place to unilaterally decide that my daughter was a criminal. I want to understand the thought process that led you to believe you had the authority to destroy her property and attempt to derail her future. Walk me through it." His request was not an invitation for an apology. It was a demand for an autopsy of her failure to be performed live without anesthetic. Heather stared at him, her mind blank with terror. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish. I thought the ticket it was first class, and she trailed off, unable to voice the ugly prejudice that had driven her. She couldn't say she didn't look like she belonged. "She looked what Ms. Montgomery—" Dominic pressed his voice dangerously soft. "Finish the sentence." "She looked young. She looked like a student. Or did she look like something else to you? Did her skin color not match the price of the ticket in your expert estimation?" The directness of the accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Heather began to sob, not tears of remorse, but of sheer terror and self-pity. "No, I'm not. I'm not a racist. I made a mistake. I was stressed. The flight was overbooked. I made a judgment call." "A judgment call." Dominic repeated the words, tasting like poison. He turned his head slightly. "Elena." Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Heather Montgomery." She read, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. 15 years of service. 12 written commendations for efficiency. 7 formal passenger complaints in the last 2 years alone, all alleging rude, dismissive, or aggressive behavior. 3 of those 7 complaints were filed by passengers of color. All 3 were dismissed by your direct supervisor, Mr. Taylor, as customer oversensitivity. An internal review for a promotion to terminal supervisor last year was denied based on feedback from your peers regarding poor interpersonal skills and a tendency toward confrontational behavior. You in turn filed a grievance claiming you were being held back. She looked up, her eyes like flint. "It seems you have a history of believing the world is conspiring against you, Ms. Montgomery." Every word from Elena's mouth was a nail in Heather's coffin. Her employment history, her failures, her resentments all laid bare in the cold, unforgiving light of the terminal. She had thought her grievances were private. She never imagined the COO of the entire airline would have them memorized. Dominic let the information hang in the air for a moment before turning his Arctic gaze on Richard Taylor. "And you, Mr. Taylor, you dismissed 3 separate complaints of racism as oversensitivity. You fostered an environment where this kind of behavior was not only possible but permissible. You enabled her. When you arrived here today, your first instinct was to protect your problematic employee and dismiss the customer who in this case happened to be my daughter. You are not just incompetent, Mr. Taylor. You are a liability to the brand I have spent my life building." Richard's face was ashen. "Mr. Wilson, sir, please. I'll do anything. I'll fire her right now. I'll write a personal apology." Dominic held up a hand, silencing him. "You will do nothing because you no longer have the authority to do anything. You are both suspended effective immediately. Your airport credentials will be revoked. You will be escorted from the premises. A full investigation will be launched by our Global Security and Human Resources divisions, headed by Ms. Rodriguez. Do you understand? Suspended. It was a corporate death sentence. They both knew it. Dominic then turned to Thomas Reynolds. His entire demeanor softened. Sir, you are Mr. Reynolds, I presume? Thomas Reynolds. Yes, he replied, impressed by the man's commanding presence. On behalf of SkyBridge Airlines, I want to thank you. You did what our employees failed to do. You stood up for another human being who was being mistreated. I understand you have a recording. I do, Thomas said, holding up his phone. My security team will take a copy of that. We will, of course, compensate you for your time and for the delay to your travels. In fact, Dominic said, a spark of an idea in his eye, I'd like to offer you and your family lifetime first-class travel on any SkyBridge flight anywhere in the world. We need more people like you, Mr. Reynolds. People with integrity. Thomas Reynolds was stunned into silence. He hadn't recorded the incident for a reward, but he recognized the gesture for what it was, a statement. I appreciate that, Mr. Wilson, but I'm more interested in seeing actual change. Would you consider bringing me in as a consultant for whatever reforms you implement after this? I've spent years studying corporate culture and bias training. Maybe there's a way I can help beyond just being a witness. Dominic's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Then he nodded with genuine respect. Now that's an offer I didn't expect. Let's discuss it. Elena, make a note. Finally, Dominic turned back to Jasmine. He gestured toward the jet bridge of the grounded A380. That plane is not going to Vienna tonight, sunshine. Jasmine's heart sank for a moment, the old panic resurfacing. Because, he continued, a faint, proud smile touching his lips for the first time. My private G700 is being fueled and catered as we speak. It will have you in Austria in 9 hours, with plenty of time for you to rest and prepare. You will not walk into that audition like any other applicant. You will walk in there as Jasmine Wilson, a young woman who faced down ugliness and injustice this morning and refused to break. You have already proven you have the strength of a virtuoso. Now go show them the music. He put his arm around his daughter's shoulder and guided her past the ruins of 2 careers, past the stunned onlookers, and toward a future that she had, in the most unexpected way, truly earned all by herself. Richard Taylor was not a stupid man. He had risen through the ranks of SkyBridge Airlines because he had a talent for managing complex logistics and handling crises with calm efficiency. But as he stood before the most powerful man in the company, the man who signed his paychecks, who could end his career with a word, his mind had gone completely blank. I need you to be very clear, Mr. Taylor. Dominic Wilson said, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. When exactly did you become aware of Ms. Montgomery's pattern of behavior? The question was a trap, and Richard knew it. If he claimed ignorance, he was incompetent. If he admitted knowledge, he was complicit. Sir, he began, his voice catching in his throat. There were incidents, passenger complaints, but nothing this severe, nothing that warranted termination. Elena Rodriguez tapped her tablet. 3 formal complaints in the past year specifically mentioned racial bias. All 3 were dismissed by you personally as customer oversensitivity. Is that correct? Richard felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Every personnel decision, every dismissed complaint, every performance review he'd signed off on was coming back to haunt him. Those complaints didn't provide clear evidence, he protested weakly. They were subjective perceptions. Subjective perceptions. Dominic repeated the words hanging in the air. And was the tearing of my daughter's ticket also a subjective perception? Was the illegal confiscation of her passport a matter of interpretation? Dominic turned to one of the security personnel. James, please have Mr. Taylor and Ms. Montgomery escorted to the administrative offices. Their credentials are to be surrendered immediately. They are not to access any company systems or remove any personal items until the investigation is complete. The security officer nodded and moved toward Richard, hand extended for his ID badge. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. This was really happening. He was being removed from the premises like a common criminal. "Mr. Wilson, please," he pleaded, a desperate edge to his voice. "I've given 15 years to SkyBridge. My record until today has been exemplary." "Your record," Dominic replied, his voice cold, "is a fiction you wrote by ignoring evidence that contradicted your narrative. You didn't just fail today, Richard. You've been failing for years. You just never had to face the consequences." As Richard fumbled with his ID badge, Heather seemed to finally emerge from her state of shock. Her face contorted with a mixture of fear and indignation. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice brittle. "One mistake and my whole career is over. I didn't know who she was. How was I supposed to know?" Dominic turned to her, his eyes like flint. "That's precisely the problem, Ms. Montgomery. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic human dignity. The fact that you think your behavior would be acceptable toward anyone except the CEO's daughter tells me everything I need to know about your character." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And let me be very clear. This was not one mistake. This was the culmination of a pattern that my company tolerated for far too long. The only mistake made today was yours picking the wrong target for your prejudice." As the security personnel guided Richard and Heather away, Dominic turned to Elena. "I want a complete review of all personnel complaints at JFK for the past 3 years. Cross-reference them against demographics. I want to know if this is isolated or indicative of a broader problem." Elena nodded, already tapping notes into her tablet. "I'll have a preliminary report by tomorrow morning. What about the passengers on 847? Dominic glanced at the large windows overlooking the tarmac where the massive A380 sat idle at the gate, a gleaming testament to the scale of his response. "Full compensation. First-class passengers get automatic upgrades on their next SkyBridge flight. Everyone gets a voucher for future travel and my personal apology." He turned to Jasmine, his expression softening. "Ready to go, sunshine?" Jasmine nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a hollow feeling in its wake. "I just need Apollo," she said, gesturing to her cello case. Dominic smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through the ice of his professional demeanor. "He's already being loaded onto the G700. Very carefully, I promise." As they turned to leave, Thomas Reynolds stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Wilson, I want you to know what I saw today wasn't just about one bad employee. It was about a culture that allowed her to feel comfortable acting that way." Dominic grasped the offered hand firmly. "I know, and I intend to fix that. Starting today." He pulled out a business card, simple white cardstock with embossed black lettering, and handed it to Thomas. "If you have any thoughts on how we can improve, my direct line is on the back. I mean that." As Dominic and Jasmine walked away, flanked by security personnel, Elena fell into step beside them. "The board is going to have questions about grounding an international flight," she said quietly. "The operational costs alone." "The board works for me, not the other way around," Dominic interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "And some things are more expensive than money, Elena. Some things cost your soul." The helipad at JFK's private aviation terminal was a circular slab of concrete marked with a large yellow H and illuminated by embedded lights that glowed like earthbound stars. As the SkyBridge corporate helicopter touched down, its rotors slicing through the air with a rhythmic whomp whomp whomp, the downwash created a small hurricane that sent loose papers swirling into the air. The 3 figures that emerged moved with purpose. 2 men in dark suits scanning the surroundings with practiced vigilance, and between them, Dominic Wilson, whose presence seemed to alter the gravitational field around him. He didn't stride so much as advance, each step precise and deliberate, a man accustomed to the world rearranging itself to accommodate his passage. Inside the terminal, Jasmine waited with Elena Rodriguez. Through the glass walls, she watched her father approach, his face set in lines of determination that she recognized from boardroom photos and magazine covers. This was not the man who made her breakfast on Sundays, or who still kept her kindergarten art projects in his office. This was Dominic Wilson, the force of nature who had built an aviation empire through sheer will and uncompromising standards. "He's not usually like this," Jasmine said quietly to Elena. Elena gave a small, knowing smile. "Actually, he is. You just usually see him when he's being your dad, not when he's defending what matters to him." The glass doors slid open and Dominic entered, his eyes immediately finding Jasmine. In that moment, his expression transformed, the hardness melting into concern, the commanding presence giving way to paternal love. "Are you okay?" he asked, reaching for her hands. "I'm fine, Dad, really," Jasmine assured him, though her voice wavered slightly. "But the audition is still happening," he finished for her. "The G700 is waiting. We'll have you in Vienna with time to spare." He turned to Elena. "What's the status on Taylor and Montgomery?" "Being processed out now," Elena replied. "Security has their credentials. Eat has locked their access. Legal is preparing the paperwork for their separation agreements contingent on non-disclosure." Dominic nodded, then turned to the security personnel. "Where's Mr. Reynolds?" "Waiting in the executive lounge, sir. We've taken his statement and secured the video evidence." "Good. Make sure he's properly thanked," Dominic said. "And the Flight 847 situation. Passengers have been informed of a security concern necessitating a ground hold. They're being rebooked or accommodated as needed. The captain has filed the appropriate reports." Jasmine watched this exchange with a mixture of awe and unease. This was her father in his element, commanding, decisive, brooking no opposition. Yet there was something almost frightening in the efficiency with which he wielded his power. "Dad," she said softly, touching his arm. "All of this, it seems like so much. For one torn ticket." Dominic turned to her, his expression serious. "This was never about a torn ticket, Sunshine. This was about a person who decided that your worth was determined by how you looked, not who you are, and a system that allowed her to act on that belief without consequence." He glanced at his watch. "We should get moving. The G700 is fueled and ready. We can talk more on the way to Vienna." As they moved through the terminal toward the private aviation section, Jasmine felt the stares of employees and travelers alike. Word had spread the CEO of SkyBridge had arrived, had grounded an international flight, had fired staff on the spot. The details were still murky, evolving with each retelling, but the essential drama was irresistible. The G700 waited on the tarmac, gleaming white against the darkening sky, the SkyBridge logo emblazoned on its tail. Unlike the commercial jets with their rows of windows, the G700 had just a few oval portals, suggesting the exclusivity of the space within. At the foot of the aircraft steps, Dominic paused. "I'm coming with you," he said, a statement, not a question. Jasmine's eyes widened. "But Dad, your meetings, the quarterly report." "Can wait," he finished. "Some things are more important than business, Jasmine. You're one of them." As they climbed the steps, Jasmine felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The humiliation of the gate incident was still there, a bruise on her spirit, but it was fading in the light of what would come next. Vienna, the audition, the future she'd worked toward for a decade. The interior of the G700 was a study in understated luxury cream leather seats that reclined into beds, polished wood surfaces, and advanced technology hidden behind elegant panels. In the main cabin, Apollo waited in his case, secured to a custom-built holder. Jasmine ran her fingers over the case, checking it for any damage. "Thank you for making sure he was safe," she said to her father. "I know how important he is to you," Dominic replied. "To both of us." The Apollo cello had been her mother's last gift before cancer took her when Jasmine was 7. It was more than an instrument. It was a connection to a woman whose face was becoming increasingly difficult to remember without photographs. Sometimes when she played a particularly emotional passage, Jasmine swore she could feel her mother's presence in the vibrations of the strings. As the jet taxied toward the runway, Dominic settled into the seat across from his daughter. "When we land in Vienna," he said, "I want you to focus only on your audition, nothing else. Not what happened today, not what I'm going to do about it, just your music." Jasmine nodded, grateful for his understanding. "I still can't believe you grounded an entire flight." A small, fierce smile played at the corners of Dominic's mouth. Sometimes the only way to make people understand the gravity of a situation is to create gravity of your own. As the G700 accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, Jasmine looked out at the receding lights of New York. Somewhere below, Heather Montgomery was probably driving home her career in ruins. Part of Jasmine felt a twinge of guilt had the punishment been too severe. But then she remembered the look on Heather's face as she tore the ticket, the casual cruelty, the assumption of guilt based on nothing more than appearance. No, the punishment wasn't too severe. It was necessary not just for Jasmine's sake, but for everyone who might have come after her without the protection of a powerful father. As the lights of the city faded behind them, Jasmine felt the emotional dam she'd been holding all day begin to crack. The tears came suddenly silently at first, then in heaving sobs that she couldn't control. All the fear, humiliation, anger, and relief poured out at once. Dominic was at her side in an instant, his arm around her shoulders. "It's okay, sunshine. Let it out." "I was so scared," she whispered between sobs. "Not just about missing the audition. The way she looked at me like I was nothing, like I didn't deserve to be there. And everyone was watching, judging." "I know," he said softly. "I've been there too." She looked up at him surprised. "You have?" He nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "My first investor meeting. I had the best business plan, the most detailed projections. But I was the only black face in the room. One investor asked if I was there to serve coffee. "What did you do?" A small smile touched his lips. "I served him coffee. Then I walked out, found investors who saw me, not just my skin, and built SkyBridge. Years later, I bought that man's company and let him go." Jasmine leaned against her father's shoulder, drawing comfort from his strength. "Will it ever stop? Will people ever just see me as a musician, not a black musician?" Dominic sighed. "I wish I could tell you it will. The truth is, some people will always see the color first. But what matters is what you see when you look in the mirror, and what you hear when you play your music. The rest is just noise." As the G700 banked eastward, setting course for Vienna, and the audition that awaited Jasmine dried her tears. Below the Atlantic spread dark and vast, a reminder of the distance yet to travel. But for the first time since the incident at the gate, she felt truly at peace. She would arrive in Vienna. She would play her heart out. And whatever happened next, she would face it with the same dignity she'd shown today. After all, she was her father's daughter. Elena Rodriguez was known throughout the airline industry as the Silk Dagger for a reason. She moved through the corporate world with grace and precision, but when she struck the cut was deep and often fatal to careers. Today, in the sterile, windowless office of JFK's administrative wing, she was about to live up to that reputation. Heather Montgomery sat rigid in her chair, staring at the table. Beside her, Richard Taylor kept wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that was already damp with sweat. Across from them sat Elena, flanked by James Burton, head of SkyBridge's global security, and 2 attorneys from the airline's formidable legal team. "Ms. Montgomery," Elena began, her voice cool and measured. "Before we proceed, I want to ensure you understand that this meeting is being recorded and that anything you say may be used in subsequent proceedings. Do you understand?" Heather nodded stiffly, Her initial shock had given way to a brittle defiance. "This is railroading," she said. "I have rights. I'm part of the union. This is wrongful termination." Elena's expression didn't change. She slid a tablet across the table. "I'm going to play a video for you." On the screen appeared Thomas Reynolds' recording. The crystal-clear footage showed everything: Heather's sneering face, her condescending tone, the chain of convenience stores comment, and the final theatrical rip of the ticket. The sound was perfect, capturing every word, every inflection. Heather watched herself on screen, the color draining from her face as her own voice echoed in the room. "Does he own a chain of convenience stores?" When the video ended, Elena retrieved the tablet. "The union agreement contains a morality clause, Ms. Montgomery," she stated coldly. "Clause 14B pertains to acts of gross misconduct, including discrimination and actions that cause significant brand damage. Your actions today don't just violate that clause. They set a new standard for it." She slid a document across the table. "The union has already been notified, and after reviewing this evidence has informed us they will not be representing you in this matter." Heather's face collapsed. The union was her shield, her last line of defense. Without it, she was utterly exposed. "Furthermore," one of the lawyers added, his voice mild, "confiscating a U.S. passport under false pretenses and without legal authority is a serious matter. We have been in contact with the State Department and Homeland Security to report the incident and ensure Miss Wilson's travel profile is cleared of the fraudulent flag you placed on it. They may have further questions for you." The threat of federal involvement was the final blow. Heather seemed to physically shrink in her chair. "Ms. Montgomery," Elena continued, "your employment with SkyBridge Airlines is terminated effective immediately for cause. You will not receive severance. Your benefits end today. Your pension, which is not yet fully vested, is frozen pending the outcome of our internal financial investigation into other potential irregularities under your supervision." She turned to Richard. "Mr. Taylor, as the supervising manager who enabled this behavior through negligence and willful disregard of previous complaints, your employment is also terminated for cause effective immediately." Richard seemed beyond protest. He simply stared at the table, a man watching his 25-year career crumble before his eyes. "You will both be escorted from the premises by security," Elena concluded. "Your personal effects will be shipped to you after they've been reviewed for any company property. You are forbidden from contacting any SkyBridge employees or entering any SkyBridge facility worldwide. Is that understood?" Neither spoke. Neither needed to. As Heather and Richard were led away by security, Elena remained seated reviewing notes on her tablet. Her work was far from done. The initial blast radius of what the staff was already calling the Wilson incident extended far beyond 2 terminated employees. Flight 847 had been delayed by 3 hours before finally departing for Vienna. Nearly 300 passengers had been inconvenienced, each one a potential public relations problem. The cost in fuel crew overtime, missed connections, and goodwill was still being calculated. But Elena knew that Dominic Wilson didn't care about those costs. He cared about the cost to his daughter's dignity and the potential cost to his company's culture if such behavior went unchecked. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dominic. "How bad is the damage?" She replied simply, "Manageable. The real question is how deep the rot goes." His response came seconds later. "Find out, no matter what it costs." Meanwhile, Thomas Reynolds' video was already making its way through digital channels. He had, with the airline's permission, shared the clip with a prominent news blogger. Within hours, #GateAgentRacism was trending on social media. The video spread like wildfire across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Users sliced it into segments, adding commentary, music, and effects. Some paired it with other videos of similar incidents, creating compilation reels that garnered millions of views. One TikTok creator with over 5 million followers overlaid the audio with animations that emphasized Heather's expressions and tone, making the prejudice even more stark. comment sections filled with thousands of stories from people who had experienced similar treatment. "This happened to me at LAX last year," wrote one user. "They made me miss my brother's wedding because they needed to verify my ticket." Another commented, "I dress up when I fly first class now because I'm tired of being questioned." News outlets picked up the story by the evening. "Gate agent tears up black teen's ticket, discovers father owns airline" became the headline of the hour. Cable news panels debated whether Heather's actions were motivated by racism or classism or both. Corporate communications experts analyzed Dominic Wilson's response, with most praising the decisiveness of his actions. The SkyBridge corporate communications team was working overtime to craft a response that struck the right balance, acknowledging the problem without appearing defensive, promising action without admitting liability. For Heather Montgomery, the nightmare was just beginning. She couldn't leave her apartment without facing reporters or angry neighbors. Job interviews for other customer service positions would end abruptly the moment a hiring manager typed her name into Google. She became overnight the face of corporate racism for the digital age, a cautionary tale of how quickly privilege wielded cruelly could become a weapon turned back on its user. The karma was not a single event. It was a slow, crushing avalanche of consequences she had triggered with one act of malice. Richard Taylor's fate was less public, but just as devastating professionally. Elena had laid out his negligence with surgical precision. "You managed a station of over 400 employees, Richard," she had said, her voice laced with disappointment. "Your one and only job was to uphold the values of this company. Chief among them is customer respect. You failed. Your file shows a pattern of ignoring complaints that should have been red flags. You created a culture of impunity. You didn't just fail to manage Heather Montgomery, you created her." A man who had built a 25-year career in aviation, Richard was now untouchable. No other major airline would hire a station manager, fired for gross negligence, leading to a multi-million-dollar scandal. He would end up taking a job managing inventory at a regional warehouse for an online retailer. The roar of jet engines replaced by the beep of handheld scanners. The fall from grace was absolute. But Dominic Wilson's plan went far beyond 2 terminations. This was not about revenge. It was about reform. The very next morning, while his G700 was still crossing the Atlantic with Jasmine, a memo went out to all 85,000 SkyBridge employees worldwide. It was written by Dominic himself. "To the SkyBridge family," it began. "Yesterday, my daughter was the victim of racist and abusive behavior at the hands of our own staff. It was a profound failure at every level. A failure of our training, a failure of our management, and a failure of our culture. This is not something we can excuse or explain away. It is something we must own and something we must change starting today." He went on to announce the Jasmine Wilson Initiative, a sweeping top-to-bottom overhaul of the company's diversity and inclusion policies. 1 mandatory retraining. Every single employee, from baggage handlers to the board of directors, would be required to complete a new intensive anti-bias and de-escalation training program. The program would be designed by leading sociologists and civil rights experts, with Thomas Reynolds brought on as a key consultant. Failure to complete and pass the course would be grounds for immediate dismissal. 2. The See Something, Say Something protocol. A new anonymous third-party reporting system was established, allowing employees to report incidents of prejudice or misconduct by their peers or superiors without fear of retaliation. A team reporting directly to Elena Rodriguez's office would investigate every single claim. 3. The Customer Bill of Rights. SkyBridge publicly released a new Customer Bill of Rights, a clear, concise document outlining the standard of respect and dignity every passenger was entitled to. It included a direct line to a new empowered passenger advocacy office. 4 performance metric changes. Management performance would no longer be judged solely on on-time departures and budget adherence. New metrics were added directly tied to customer satisfaction scores and the number of unresolved complaints within their teams. A manager like Richard Taylor would now find his bonus directly impacted by the complaints he was so quick to dismiss. The initiative was monumental in scope and cost. Wall Street analysts questioned the expense, but Dominic Wilson addressed them head-on in a press conference. "Some of you may see this as a blow to our bottom line," he said, standing before a backdrop of the SkyBridge logo. "I see it as the most critical investment we will ever make. A brand is not a logo or a fleet of aircraft. It is a promise. Our promise is to connect people, not to divide them. For a brief, ugly moment yesterday, we broke that promise. My goal is to ensure that we never, ever break it again. The Jasmine Wilson Initiative will not be a short-term PR fix. It will become the permanent, unshakable bedrock of this company's culture. Any employee who cannot subscribe to that culture will find that there are many other airlines they can work for, but not this one." 9 hours after departing JFK, the Gulfstream G700 sliced through the dawn sky over Austria. Its descent was a graceful arc toward Vienna International Airport. Jasmine had slept for a few hours, the plush leather seat converting into a comfortable bed, but her mind was still racing. The events at the gate felt both a lifetime ago and like they were still happening. She could still feel the phantom sting of humiliation, the cold knot of fury in her stomach. When she woke, her father, who had taken a call with Elena Rodriguez in the jet's private office, was sitting across from her, a cup of tea waiting on the polished wood table. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. "Shaken," Jasmine admitted, "and angry. Not just for me, Dad. What if that had been someone who didn't have you to call? What if her father really did own a convenience store? Would she just have been turned away? Would she be sitting in some detention room right now? Her dream gone just because of what she looked like?" Dominic nodded, his expression somber. "Yes, and that is what we are going to change. What happened to you? Sunshine was unacceptable, but it was also a gift. It was a spotlight that showed me a darkness in my own house that I couldn't see. We're going to fix it. That's my promise to you and to that girl who couldn't make the call." A sense of purpose settled over Jasmine, chasing away the last vestiges of her fear. This was bigger than her audition. Now her experience would mean something. "I think I need to play," she said suddenly, "before we land, to clear my head." Dominic smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The G700's main cabin was spacious enough that Jasmine could set up Apollo comfortably. She removed the cello from its case with the reverence of a priest handling sacred relics. The wood gleamed in the cabin's soft lighting, the patina of centuries catching the glow. As she positioned the end pin and adjusted her seat, memories of her mother flooded back her gentle hands, guiding 7-year-old Jasmine's fingers to the right positions on the fingerboard, her patient voice explaining that music was emotion, translated into sound. "Close your eyes," her mother had said. "Don't just play the notes, feel them." Now, 30,000 feet above the earth, Jasmine closed her eyes and drew the bow across the strings. The first note resonated through the cabin, deep and pure. She began with Bach, the familiar territory of the first suite, the notes dancing like old friends. But then, without planning it, she transitioned into something else, something unwritten, something born in that moment. Dominic watched in wonder as his daughter improvised, her face a canvas of changing emotions, anger giving way to determination, pain transforming into strength. The music was raw, defiant, beautiful in its complexity. It told the story of the day, but it also told the story of her life, of his life, of their shared journey. When the final note faded, there was a moment of perfect silence. "That was..." Dominic began, then stopped, unable to find words adequate to describe what he'd just witnessed. "I think I just found my audition piece," Jasmine said quietly. They landed and were whisked through a private terminal to the Hotel Sacher, a bastion of old-world Viennese elegance. Apollo was treated with the reverence due to royalty carefully transported to Jasmine's suite by white-gloved staff who understood the value of the instrument. Vienna was a city that breathed music. As Jasmine looked out from her hotel balcony, she could almost hear the whispers of Mozart and Beethoven in the Baroque architecture, the cobblestone streets, the graceful parks. This was a place where music was not just entertainment, it was the lifeblood of culture. After a light breakfast and a few hours of practice, Jasmine felt her focus crystallize. The chaos of New York receded, replaced by the beautiful, demanding language of her cello. She was ready. The Vienna Conservatory of Music stood like a temple to art, its imposing facade a promise of the excellence it demanded. Jasmine walked through its hallowed halls, Apollo secure in his case on her back. The air was hushed and reverent, smelling of aged wood rosin and history. In the waiting area, she saw other applicants, their faces pale with nerves, clutching their instruments like lifelines. They were all equals here, bound by a shared love and a terrifying hope. Yet Jasmine felt something different now, a fire that had been tempered in the crucible of yesterday's humiliation. A slender woman with silver hair approached. "Miss Wilson, I'm Professor Schumann. You'll be performing for us in 10 minutes. Is there anything you need?" "Just a place to warm up, please," Jasmine replied. The professor nodded, leading her to a small practice room. "The judges are looking forward to your performance. Your reputation precedes you." Alone in the practice room, Jasmine took deep breaths, centering herself. She ran through scales, feeling the familiar calluses on her fingertips press against the strings. Then she closed her eyes and thought of her mother. "I wish you could see me now," she whispered. "I'm going to play for you today." When her name was called, she walked onto the stage of the small, acoustically perfect recital hall. The panel of judges, 3 of the world's most renowned musicians, looked at her with impassive, critical eyes. They didn't know or care about what had happened at JFK. They only cared about the music. Jasmine positioned Apollo and took a deep, centering breath. She did not think of Heather Montgomery or torn tickets. She thought of her father's promise. She thought of her mother's hands guiding hers. She thought of the girl who couldn't make the call. She poured all of it, the anger, the humiliation, the fear, the love, the resolve into her bow. And she played. The first note Jasmine coaxed from Apollo was deep, resonant, and heartbreakingly pure. It filled the hall not just with sound, but with emotion, a single perfect tone that seemed to carry the weight of generations. The 3 judges sat up straighter, their expressions shifting subtly from professional detachment to keen interest. Jasmine had prepared Bach's Cello Suite No. 5 for her audition, a technically demanding piece that showcased mastery of the instrument. But as her bow moved across the strings, she realized she was playing something else entirely. Her fingers found their own path, creating a composition that existed nowhere. The first note Jasmine coaxed from Apollo was deep, resonant, and heartbreakingly pure. It filled the hall not just with sound, but with emotion, a single, perfect tone that seemed to carry the weight of generations. The 3 judges sat up straighter, their expressions shifting subtly from professional detachment to keen interest. Jasmine had prepared Bach's Cello Suite No. 5 for her audition, a technically demanding piece that showcased mastery of the instrument. But as her bow moved across the strings, she realized she was playing something else entirely. Her fingers found their own path, creating a composition that existed nowhere but in this moment, born from everything she had experienced. The music began with tension staccato notes that spoke of confrontation, of barriers erected and dignity challenged. Then it evolved, flowing into a passage of such aching vulnerability that one of the judges, an elderly maestro known for his stoicism, closed his eyes, his face softening with emotion. As Jasmine played, she saw not the polished wooden stage, but the gleaming counter of the airport gate. She heard not just the resonance of Apollo's strings, but the terrible sound of paper tearing. Each note became a transformation of that moment, not erasing it, but redeeming it, turning pain into something transcendent. The piece built toward a crescendo that was neither triumph nor surrender, but something more complex, a declaration of selfhood, of value beyond external validation. Her bow danced across the strings with controlled ferocity, her left hand pressing the fingerboard with the precision of a decade's dedication. In the final movement, something shifted. The melody became achingly familiar, a lullaby her mother had sung to her as a child, woven seamlessly into the complex tapestry of her improvisation. It was as if her mother's spirit had joined her on that stage, guiding her fingers, breathing through the music. The final note lingered in the air, vibrating with possibilities before fading into a silence so profound it seemed almost solid. For several heartbeats, no one moved. The three judges remained perfectly still, as if awakening from a collective dream. Then the elderly maestro Conrad Schwartz, a man whose criticism had reduced virtuosos to tears, slowly removed his glasses. "Miss Wilson," he said, his accent thick, but his English precise. "In 43 years of judging auditions, I have never heard anything quite like that." He turned to his colleagues. "Have you—" The woman to his left, Professor Adele Berger, shook her head. "That was not Bach." "No," Jasmine admitted, suddenly aware of what she had done. Had she ruined everything by abandoning the prepared piece? "It was something else. I'm sorry if—" "Sorry," Professor Schwartz interrupted. "Do not apologize for giving us a gift. What we just heard was not a student performing a master's work. It was an artist speaking her own truth." The third judge, a younger man with intense eyes, leaned forward. "Was that your composition, Miss Wilson?" "It was improvised," Jasmine said. "I've never played it before." A look of astonishment passed between the judges. "We would like to deliberate," Professor Berger said. "Please wait outside." Jasmine carefully placed Apollo back in his case, her hands trembling slightly. Had she made a terrible mistake, or had something extraordinary just happened? As she walked from the stage, she felt both lighter and heavier, freed from the weight of expectations, yet burdened with the enormity of what she had just revealed of herself. In the waiting area, other applicants glanced at her with a mixture of curiosity and envy. They had heard through the heavy doors something unusual happening. One girl about Jasmine's age approached her. "That didn't sound like Bach," she said, her German accent giving her words a musical quality. "It wasn't," Jasmine admitted. The girl's eyes widened. "You changed the audition piece. That's either very brave or very stupid," Jasmine supplied with a small smile. "I was going to say confident," the girl replied. "I'm Liesel, by the way." "Jasmine." "I know who you are," Liesel said. "Everyone does. The American prodigy." Before Jasmine could respond, the door opened and Professor Berger appeared. "Miss Wilson, would you come back in, please?" Jasmine gathered Apollo and returned to the stage, her heart pounding. The three judges were huddled together, papers spread before them. They looked up as she entered. "Miss Wilson," Professor Schwartz began, "we have reached a unanimous decision." He paused, and for that terrible moment Jasmine was certain she had failed spectacularly. "We would like to offer you not only a place at the conservatory, but the Hertzfeld Scholarship, our highest honor given to only one student each year." Jasmine's breath caught. Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Professor Schwartz replied with a rare smile. "Your music has already said everything necessary. What we heard today was not merely technique, though yours is exemplary. It was the voice of an artist who has something unique to say to the world. There is one condition," Professor Berger added. "We would like you to develop what you played today into a formal composition. We believe it has the makings of an extraordinary piece." Jasmine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. In that moment, she understood that yesterday's humiliation had not just been an obstacle to overcome, it had been the catalyst for her greatest artistic breakthrough. As she left the hall, cello case strapped to her back, she felt a strange sense of gratitude toward Heather Montgomery. The gate agent's cruelty had unlocked something in Jasmine, a depth of emotion, a well of experience that transformed her playing from technically excellent to transcendent. Outside, the Vienna air was crisp, the sky a perfect blue. Jasmine pulled out her phone to call her father, but before she could dial, she saw a text message from him. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." She smiled and typed back, "I got in, and more, much more." 3 months later, Jasmine was thriving in Vienna. She lived in a small apartment overlooking a cobblestone street, practiced for hours each day, explored the city's rich history, and made friends with fellow musicians from all over the world. Liesel, the girl she had met at the audition, had become her closest friend and occasional duet partner. Together, they explored Vienna's cafes and concert halls, Liesel showing Jasmine the hidden musical treasures of the city she'd known her whole life. The conservatory had been buzzing when Jasmine's identity as the SkyBridge heiress was revealed, but the excitement quickly gave way to respect as her extraordinary talent became apparent. Professor Schwartz had taken a special interest in her composition now titled Torn and Mended, helping her refine it into a piece that maintained the raw emotion of the original improvisation while adding structural sophistication. One evening, Jasmine was on a video call with her father. He was in his office in New York, looking tired but satisfied. "The first wave of the initiative's training modules got a 98% completion rate," he told her, a proud smile on his face. "The Passenger Advocacy Office has resolved over 500 cases this quarter alone. We're seeing a real shift, sunshine. It's working." "I knew it would," Jasmine said, smiling back. "And Dad—" "Yes, sunshine. Thank you, not for the jet or the hotel or even for fixing things. Thank you for believing in me, and thank you for using what happened to build something good." "You're the one who built something good, Jasmine," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. "You faced down ugliness with grace, and you turned it into fuel for your art. You are the strongest person I know." His eyes drifted to something behind her, the framed poster on her wall announcing her upcoming debut performance at the Musikverein, one of Vienna's most prestigious concert halls. "I've booked my flight," he said. "Front row, just like I promised." "Not on the G700, she teased. He laughed. "No, actually. Commercial. First class on SkyBridge. I want to experience what our passengers are experiencing." His expression softened. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Jasmine." The mention of her mother brought a familiar ache, but now it was intertwined with the warmth of memory. "I feel her sometimes," Jasmine admitted. "When I play, especially Torn and Mended, it's like she's guiding my hands." "She is," Dominic said simply. "Every time you play, she's there. In the Wood of Apollo, in the music she taught you to love in your fingers that look so much like hers." After ending the call, Jasmine stood by the window of her apartment looking out at the Vienna night. The lights of the ancient city sparkled like earthbound stars, each one a story, a life, a possibility. She thought about how a single moment, the tearing of a ticket, had altered the trajectory of not just her life, but countless others. She reached for Apollo, positioning him between her knees, and began to play the piece that had been born from that moment of humiliation. But now, as the music filled her small apartment, she recognized that it wasn't just about pain anymore. It was about transformation, the alchemy that turns wounds into wisdom, suffering into strength. The final movement, the one that incorporated her mother's lullaby, had evolved into something new, a dialogue between past and present, between loss and creation. As she played, Jasmine felt a profound sense of connection to her mother, to her father, to all those who had ever been underestimated or dismissed. 2 weeks later, Jasmine made her debut at the Musikverein. The grand hall, with its gilded columns and perfect acoustics, was filled to capacity. In the front row sat Dominic Wilson, his eyes shining with pride. Jasmine walked onto the stage in a simple black dress, Apollo in hand. She took her position, adjusted her seat, and looked out at the audience. For a brief moment, she was transported back to the gate at JFK to the sensation of being judged and found wanting. Then she closed her eyes, drew her bow across the strings, and began to play. The first note of Torn and Mended filled the hall, deep and resonant and full of truth. What followed was not just music, but testimony, a declaration that worth is not determined by others' perceptions, that dignity cannot be torn apart, that art can transform even the ugliest moments into something beautiful. When the final note faded, there was a moment of profound silence, the audience collectively holding its breath. Then the applause began building from a patter to a roar. Jasmine stood Apollo in one hand, bow in the other, and took a bow. As she straightened, her eyes found her father's. In that moment of connection, both understood that the sound of tearing paper had indeed changed everything, not by destroying a dream, but by revealing a deeper truth. The ticket to Vienna had been torn, but the journey had just begun. And the music that emerged from that moment would continue to resonate, note by powerful note, long after the applause had faded. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of resilience and justice. Remember that sometimes our most painful moments can become catalysts for our greatest transformations. What moment in your life transformed pain into strength? Let us know in the comments below.